The certified letter is in the mail, its delivery confirmation a ticking clock against their smiling, expectant faces. It began this morning in my kitchen. The little river cottage kitchen Ruth and I designed. The old refrigerator hummed its steady tune, while sunlight warmed the wooden counters. I was slicing lemons for my tea, the sharp, clean scent filling the air. That's when the doorbell rang. It was Megan, my daughter, and her husband David, holding a large, ostentatious gift box. It looked completely out of place in the quiet simplicity of my home. A vanilla candle flickered on the sill, its sweetness a stark contrast to the cloying perfume Megan wore. "Happy early Father's Day, Dad," Megan chirped, her smile a little too wide. David stood behind her, shifting his weight from one expensive shoe to the other. He had the weak, restless energy of a man who lives on someone else's dime. He placed the box on my small kitchen table, right next to my half-cut lemon. It was wrapped in heavy, cream-colored paper and tied with a thick piece of twine, the knot sealed with a blob of pretentious red wax. "You shouldn't have," I said, the words automatic. I looked from her face to the box. Something about the precision of the wrapping, the formality of the wax seal, felt less like a gift and more like a presentation, a proposal. "It's just a little something to show you we're thinking of you," she said, smoothing down her already perfect dress. "We know how much this place means to you, all on your own now. Must be lonely." Her voice was syrupy, but her eyes did a quick inventory of the room. David finally spoke. "Yeah, how? A place like this, on the river? The market is insane. Megan was just saying the other day, this cottage has to be worth what? $890,000 easy?" He whistled, a low, greedy sound that was immediately cut off by a sharp look from his wife. I just nodded slowly, picking up a lemon slice and dropping it into my tea. The number hung in the air, ugly and obvious. It was never about me being lonely. "Open it, Dad," Megan urged, gesturing toward the box. "It's something special, something to help you, preserve memories." I ran a finger over the red wax seal on the twine. It was perfectly impressed with the letter M. It was cold and hard to the touch. In my old job, we dealt with seals and stamps every day. We learned that the most important information was often in the packaging, not the contents. A lesson in looking at the container before celebrating the prize inside. I stalled, taking a slow sip of my tea. The warmth felt good in my hands. "I'll get to it in a bit, sweetheart. Let it be a surprise for later." I could see a flicker of annoyance in her eyes, quickly masked with another bright smile. They wanted me to open it while they were here. They wanted to watch my face, to manage my reaction. That much was clear. Their impatience was a tangible thing in my quiet kitchen, buzzing like a trapped fly against the window pane. They didn't stay long after that. My lack of immediate enthusiasm seemed to drain the energy from their performance. They gave me tight, quick hubs at the door, promising to call later to see if I liked my gift. "Make sure you look at every page, Dad," Megan called back from the gravel path. "Especially the last one. It's the most important." Her words were meant to sound sweet and sentimental, a loving daughter's instruction. But they landed like a command, a directive I was expected to follow without question. But 30 years, as a postal inspector, teaches you to look at the seal, not just the gift. After their car crunched its way down the driveway and the dust settled, I carried the box into my study. It's a small room, filled with books and the quiet presence of my late wife, Ruth. Her reading glasses were still on the desk where she left them. I sat in my worn leather chair and looked at the box for a long time. The evening river breeze began to drift through the open window. Finally, I took a small letter opener and carefully slit the tape on the bottom, preserving the twine and seal. Inside, nestled in a bed of shredded paper, was a heavy, leather-bound book. It was embossed with gold letters. "The Memories of Our Family." It looked expensive, the kind of thing people buy when they want to appear thoughtful without actually putting in any thought. I opened it. The first few pages had pictures of Megan as a child, of holidays long past, even one of me and Ruth on our wedding day. The captions were in Megan's loopy, self-conscious handwriting. It was a good prop. I flipped through the mostly empty pages. The paper was thick, creamy and textured. But just as Megan had hinted, the last page was different. It was a single sheet adhered to the back cover. The paper was thinner, smoother, with a perforated edge at the top. It was titled A Father's Legacy, A Memory for the Future. Below that, in dense, almost unreadable print, was a wall of legal text. My eyes, even at 72, are still sharp. I found the words that mattered. Quickly indeed, the phrase jumped out at me like a striking snake. Below it, the legal description of my property, this very cottage. My name was listed as grantor and Megan's as grantee. There was a line for my signature, a space for a witness, and a perfectly stamped official-looking notary section at the bottom. The document number was clearly printed, Doc 2025-11877. It was a complete predatory instrument disguised as a keepsake. All it needed was my signature on the memory cage. A cold feeling washed over me, but it wasn't fear. It was a familiar professional coldness. The feeling I used to get when a case started to take shape, when the disparate pieces of mail fraud or forgery began to form a coherent picture of deceit. They thought I was a sentimental old fool who would be so touched by the photos that I'd sign anything they put in front of me. They had underestimated me completely. It was a classic amateurish play, but dangerous all the same. I thought of Ruth. She had planted the lemon trees by the river's edge with her own hands. We had built this cottage together, board by board, a testament to a life of quiet, steady work. The thought of Megan and that useless husband of hers, selling it off for a quick profit, erasing everything Ruth and I had built, settled like a stone in my gut. This wasn't just about the money. It was about erasure. It was about contempt. And I would not allow it. My phone rang, and Megan's picture appeared on the screen. I let it ring 4 times before answering, affecting a slightly tired, slow voice. "Hello, sweetheart." "Hi, Dad. Did you open it? Did you see the book?" she asked, her voice high with feigned excitement. I told her I had, that it was a very thoughtful gift. I could almost hear her silent sigh of relief through the phone. "It's beautiful, Megan. Truly. I'm just taking my time with it. So many memories. You know." "Of course, Dad. Take all the time you need," she said, a little too quickly. "Just don't wait too long. David and I put a lot of work into it, and we were hoping to, get it all squared away soon, for safekeeping." Squared away. A strange choice of words for a memory book. They were on a timeline. That was a crucial piece of information. I needed to know what their deadline was. I needed to control the clock now, not them. After the call, I went to the locked cabinet in my study. Inside was a small, unassuming box. My old kit. It held a magnifying glass, a set of fine point tweezers, a high-intensity UV flashlight, and various other tools of my former trade. Most of it hadn't been used in years, that I kept it maintained. Old habits. I took out the ultraviolet light and the magnifying glass and returned to the desk. The fraudulent deed laid out before me under the glow of my lamp. Under the UV light, the paper gave off a faint, uneven glow. Modern security paper has specific watermarks, fibers, or chemical patterns that are invisible in normal light. This page had none. It was just high-quality printer paper, expertly cut. But the notary seal was the real prize. I looked at it under the loupe. The stamp impression was just a little too uniform, the ink a little too flat. A real hand stamp always has subtle imperfections, a slight variation in pressure. The notary public's name was listed, along with a commission number, Notary ID 04719. A quick search on the state's public records website would likely tell me if that notary was real, expired, or entirely fabricated. But I didn't search. Not yet. Tipping my hand by making an official online query was a rookie mistake. For now, I was just gathering my own evidence, documenting their methods, building my case in the quiet of my study, with only the river breeze for company. The next afternoon, they were back. They didn't call first. They just appeared on my doorstep with a box of pastries from a bakery they know I dislike. A transparent attempt at goodwill. We were just in the neighborhood. Megan said, brushing past me into the kitchen. David followed, carrying the box like an offering. They were nervous. It was written all over them, in the tightness of their smiles, and the quick, darting glances that gave the study down the hall. I played the part of the slightly confused, slow-moving father. I made us tea using the same lemon from yesterday. I talked about the weather, about the rising water levels in the river. I didn't mention the book. I made them bring it up. Finally, after an agonizing silence, David cleared his throat. So Hal, did you have a chance to finish looking at that book we brought you? Megan's really proud of it. His gaze flickered towards the hallway again. Oh, yes, it was lovely, I said, taking a slow sip of my tea. I was just admiring the last page, all those official-looking words. My eyesight isn't what it used to be, you know. I'll have to find my strong reading glasses to make sense of all that tiny print. Probably need a day or two to really read it properly. I watched Megan's face. A muscle in her jaw twitched. She was trying to be patient, but it was costing her. It's not really for reading, Dad, she said, her voice strained. It's more of a symbolic gesture, to show how the family legacy continues through me. You just have to sign it. You can trust me. That was the line. You can trust me. The plea of every con artist and swindler I had ever investigated. The moment those words are spoken, you know with absolute certainty that the person speaking them is the last person on earth you should ever trust. They left soon after, their frustration barely concealed. I knew they'd be back, and their next attempt would be less subtle. As I walked them to the door, I made a point of leaving my phone on the kitchen table. They had given me a smart speaker for Christmas, one of those listening devices they called a convenience. It sat on the hall table, its little blue light occasionally pulsing. I had never trusted it, and now I was about to find out if my suspicions were justified. As they were stepping out, the smart speaker in the hall, which they had gifted me, suddenly announced in its calm, robotic voice, "Call with Sarah connected." He hears Megan's hushed, frantic whisper. He's stalling. Did you check if the notary stamp was aligned? We needed filed by the 16th of June. I froze in the doorway, my hand on the knob. They must have accidentally triggered the call function on one of their phones. A pocket dial to a friend, broadcast into my home. David's voice was a low hiss. Shut it off, shut it off. There was a frantic fumbling sound. The speaker went silent. I turned slowly from the door, my expression unchanged. They were staring at me, their faces pale with shock and fear. They didn't know if I had heard. I gave them a slow, slightly confused smile. Everything all right out there? Sounded like your phone was making a fuss. I let them believe I was just an old man who heard a jumble of noise. Megan forced a laugh. Oh, silly phone, always doing things on its own. They practically ran to their car. I watched them go, my face a mask of benign bewilderment. But inside, everything had sharpened to a fine point. The 16th of June. That was their deadline. And they had a partner named Sarah. And they were worried about the alignment of a fraudulent notary stamp. It was more than enough. The casual cruelty of their whispers had erased any lingering doubt, any wisp of fatherly sentiment. I closed the door. The house was quiet again. I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt a profound sense of clarity. The grief I felt was for the daughter I thought I had, a person who clearly no longer existed, if she ever did. What was left was a problem to be solved, a case to be closed. My training, dormant for years, came rushing back. I was no longer a grieving husband or a doting father. I was an inspector again, and I had a fraud case to build. First things first, chain of custody. Evidence is useless if its integrity can be questioned. I put on a pair of thin latex gloves from under the kitchen sink. I carefully placed the leather book and its deceitful final page into a large evidence bag, one I had kept from my old supplies. I labeled it with the date, time, and a brief description. I then took detailed photographs of the document, the notary seal, and the book itself, using my phone. My mind worked methodically, creating a checklist. 1. Secure the evidence. 2. Create a timeline of events. 3. Establish intent. 4. Prepare the countermove. Their deadline of June 16th gave me a clear window to operate. They had unknowingly handed me their entire strategy. I would not be reacting to their moves anymore. From this moment on, I would be controlling the board, and they wouldn't even see my hand until it was too late. The next morning, I drove to the main post office 2 towns over, not my small local branch. I needed a postmark they wouldn't recognize, a starting point for a paper trail they couldn't possibly anticipate. I prepared 2 envelopes. The first was a large, padded mailer addressed to my lawyer, a sharp woman named Mrs. Gable, who had handled our estate planning years ago. She was retired now, but I knew she would take my call for a matter like this. Inside, I included a letter detailing the entire situation, along with a set of the photographs I had taken. I asked her to act as a third-party witness to the evidence, requesting she notarize a statement from me affirming the timeline of events. It was a belt and suspenders approach, but I had learned that in matters of fraud, you can never have too much documentation. I sent the package via Priority Express mail, with signature confirmation and a return receipt requested. The second envelope was smaller. It was addressed to the Records Division of the County Clerk's Office. Inside was a simple, 1-page form I had downloaded from their website, a property fraud alert registration. It was a free service. It meant that any document, deed, or lien filed against my property would trigger an immediate email and phone call notification to me. It was an electronic tripwire. If they tried to file their forged deed, I would know instantly. I paid the clerk in cash and watched as she affixed the postage and the certified mail sticker to my letter to the county. The crisp sound of the date stamp hitting the paper was deeply satisfying. It was a formal, official act, a declaration. The first move in a game they didn't even know we were playing. As I walked out into the sunshine, I felt a calm I hadn't felt in days. The trap was now being set. All I had to do was wait for them to walk into it. 2 days later, the email confirmations arrived. One from Mrs. Gable's office, acknowledging receipt of my package. The other was from the county, confirming my property fraud alert was active. My tripwires were now live. I spent the afternoon by the river, watching the water flow, thinking of Ruth. We had planned for our future, but we never planned for this. For a betrayal that cut deeper than any simple financial theft. The quiet certainty of the law was my only comfort now. My phone rang that evening. It was Megan. Her voice was brittle. "Dad, we need to talk. David and I have a friend, Sarah, who is a notary. She's going to be near your place tomorrow, and she said she could just pop in and witness your signature. To make it all official, it will only take a minute." So, the accomplice had a name, and she was being brought into play. Their patience had finally run out. They were escalating, forcing my hand. "Oh, I don't know, sweetheart. I don't like to have visitors. I don't know," I said, keeping my voice frail. "Don't be silly, Dad. She's a professional. We'll be there with her, around 11 a.m. Just have the book ready, okay?" She didn't ask. She told me. The request had become a summons. I agreed meekly and hung up. The final act was about to begin, and it would take place on my stage, in my house. I was ready for them. The next morning, I prepared the scene. I put the leather book on the dining room table, not the kitchen table. The dining room has better light and a large, solid oak table that feels more formal, more official. I set out a pot of weak tea and 3 cups. I wanted everything to appear normal, compliant. An old man preparing to be guided through a process he doesn't quite understand. The performance of a lifetime required the right props. They arrived precisely at 11. A woman with bleached blonde hair and a nervous smile trailing behind them. "Dad, this is Sarah," Megan announced. Sarah carried a briefcase and wore a suit that was a size too tight. She avoided my eyes, focusing instead on the book on the table. She looked less like a state-licensed notary and more like a car salesperson who was having a very bad month. David hovered by the door, a hulking, silent partner in the crime. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Miller," Sarah said, her voice a little shaky. She opened her briefcase and took out a notary stamp and a logbook. It all looked plausible from a distance. "If you'll just show me your ID and sign on the last page, We can get this all wrapped up. She was rushing, pushing forward with a momentum fueled by anxiety. I smiled warmly. Of course, of course. Let me just get my driver's license. It's in my study. I took my time walking to the study and back. I let the silence in the dining room stretch, letting their nerves fray. I handed Sarah my license. She glanced at it for half a second before handing it back. Our real notary would have checked the photo, the name, the expiration date carefully. Her haste was another mark against her. All right, Harold, Megan said, her voice sharp with impatience. Just sign where the little yellow sticky note is. I sat down at the table and picked up my pen. I looked at the page again, squinting. You know, my hand has been a bit shaky lately. I hope I can make my signature clear enough for all this official business. I made a few practice loops on a napkin. Megan's foot was tapping a frantic rhythm on the hardwood floor. David was sweating, a faint sheen on his forehead. They were so close they could taste the commission from the sale of my home. Then I looked at Sarah. Before I sign, can I see your notary commission certificate? My wife, Ruth, was always so particular about these things. Said you should always check, just to be safe. Sarah's smile froze on her face. Her eyes darted toward Megan. Oh, well, I don't usually carry it with me, she stammered. It's on file with the state, of course. I nodded slowly. I see, no problem at all. Just an old man's habit. The seed of fear was planted. They thought the game was about my signature. They never once thought to check the trust. With a hand that was now deliberately unsteady, I signed my name on the line. I didn't use my full formal signature. I used the slightly sloppier version I reserved for package deliveries. It was legally mine, but it wasn't the signature of record on my banking or property documents. A small private act of defiance. Sarah quickly snatched the book, stamped the page with a loud thud, signed her name, and entered a notation in her log. Megan's face was a mask of pure, triumphant relief. She beamed at me. Thank you, Dad. This means so much. It makes everything simpler for the future. She took the book, holding it like a trophy. David clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture of false camaraderie that made my skin crawl. You're a good man, Hal. We'll take good care of the place, of her legacy. They couldn't even bring themselves to say my wife's name. They left in a hurry, their mission accomplished. They didn't even touch the tea I had poured for them. I stood at the window and watched their car speed down the long gravel driveway. They were probably heading straight to the county clerk's office to file the deed before the office closed for the day. They believed they had won. They believed the cottage, my home, was now theirs. They had the signature. They had the stamp. They had the paperwork. I walked back to the dining room table and cleaned up the untouched teacups. The house was quiet. The air was still. The only sound was the familiar, steady hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. It was the sound of my life, the sound of my home, a home they thought they had just stolen. I sat down and waited. I knew it wouldn't take long. My phone was on the table in front of me, screen dark. The electronic tripwire was waiting. An hour and 17 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was an email. The subject line was stark. Property alert. Document filed. Parcel ID 770412345506. I opened it. It confirmed a quitclaim deed. Doc number 2025-11877 had been presented for recording against my property. My heart was perfectly calm. The trap had been sprung. They had taken the bait, and in their greed, had officially submitted a fraudulent document into the public record. A felony. I picked up the phone. I didn't call my lawyer. I didn't call the police. I dialed a number I knew from memory. The direct line to the head of the county's property records division, a man named Gene. We had worked a case together a decade ago involving a complex mail and deed fraud scheme. Gene, it's Harold Miller. Hope I'm not interrupting your afternoon. There was a pause, then a warm, familiar voice. How? Good to hear from you. What can I do for you? I'm calling about a quitclaim deed that was just filed against my property. Doc 2025-11877. I said, my voice even and professional. I believe you'll find it's fraudulent. Jean was silent for a moment. I could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard. I'm looking at it right now, Hal. It looks signed and notarized. What's the issue? I took a slow breath. It was time to reveal the architecture of their failure. First, I said the notary. One Sarah Jenkins notary ID 0419 is a fabrication. That ID number belongs to a man in a different county whose commission expired 3 years ago. So that's forgery of a public seal. I heard Jean let out a low whistle. That's the problem, but Hal, they could argue you signed it willingly, even with a bad notary. It could get messy, a civil matter. He was right. That was only the first lock. That brings me to the second point, Jean, and this is the important one. The property isn't mine to give away with a simple signature. Check the title history. The cottage is not owned by Harold Miller. It's owned by the Miller Family Irrevocable Trust, established in 2012. This was the shield Ruth and I had built, her foresight, her final gift of protection to me. An irrevocable trust is a fortress. Assets placed within it are no longer yours. A conveyance from the trust requires the signatures of 2 trustees, myself and the appointed corporate trustee from the bank. And it must be done in person at the bank's legal office with our specific legal counsel present. That quitclaim deed is not just fraudulent, G. It's a legal impossibility. It's a worthless piece of paper trying to steal something that the grantor doesn't even technically own. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. Jesus, Hal, Jean finally said, his voice a mixture of shock and professional admiration. So they went to all that trouble for nothing. Not for nothing, I corrected him gently. They went to all that trouble to commit multiple felonies. You now have a fraudulent document submitted for official record with my daughter's name on it as the grantee. I imagine your office will need to inform the district attorney. I had handed them a perfect self-contained case. We will, Jean said, his voice now firm and official. Thank you, Hal. We'll handle it from here. We'll flag the document as void and open an investigation immediately. I thanked him and hung up. I sat in the quiet dining room, the late afternoon sun streaming through the windows. The law was now in motion, a force far greater than their petty greed. I had not acted in anger. I had simply presented the facts. The consequences were their own creation. An hour later, as dusk began to settle over the river, headlights swept across my living room wall. They were back. I wasn't surprised. The clerk's office must have called them. Their car door slammed with a sound of impotent rage. I didn't get up. I just sat in my armchair, waiting. The doorbell rang, a frantic, insistent series of jabs. I ignored it. Then came the banging on the door. Dad, open this door. We need to talk to you. Megan's voice was shrill, panicked. Finally, I heard David's voice, a low roar of frustration, and the sound of a key in the lock. The emergency key I had given them years ago. They stormed in, their faces pale and twisted with fury. The clerk's office called, David snarled, his pretense of civility gone. They said the deed is void. They said there's an investigation. What did you do? He stood over me, his hands clenched into fists. I didn't flinch. I just looked at him. Megan was crying now, ugly, gasping sobs. How could you do this to me, Dad, to your own family? I just wanted to secure my inheritance, to protect this place. I finally turned my gaze to her. The tears were for herself, for her failed plan, not for her betrayal. This place was never your inheritance to secure, I said, my voice quiet, but carrying across the room. It was my life. It was your mother's life, and you tried to steal it for its market value. You signed it, she shrieked. We saw you. The notary stamped it. It was almost pitiful. They were so focused on the mechanics of their little con, they never bothered to understand the nature of the prize itself. They saw a house, a number with a dollar sign. They didn't see the legal structure that protected it, the love and foresight that had been poured into its foundation just as surely as the concrete had been. They were thieves who tried to crack a safe without knowing it was empty. Yes, you did, I said calmly. You watched me sign a worthless document that you attached to a fraudulent notary seal, and then you submitted it to the county as a public record. You did all of this. I just sat here and drank my tea. The simplicity of it seemed to break them. There was no complex scheme to uncover, no loophole I had exploited. I had just let them build their own gallows, and then watched as they walked up the steps all by themselves. David took a step toward me, his face purple with rage. You old bastard, you set us up. He was right. I had. I'd used their greed, their arrogance, their contempt for me as the bait. I had built a trap from the materials they handed me. I had been a passenger in their crime, a quiet observer in the back seat, letting them drive themselves straight off a cliff. My silence had been my greatest weapon against their noise and their hurry. Get out of my house, I said. The words were not loud, but they landed in the room with the weight of a judge's gavel. For the first time, they seemed to understand their position. They were not angry children confronting a stubborn father. They were criminals standing in the home of their victim, a victim who now held all the power. They were trespassers. Their key no longer gave them any rights here. The lock had been changed, legally and metaphorically. Megan's crying subsided into a desperate whimper. Dad, please don't let this happen. The DA, they'll press charges. My life will be ruined. David's career. Her plea was no longer about the house or the money. It was about consequences, a concept she had clearly never considered. She was looking at me, not as a father, but as a witness for the prosecution. She was finally seeing me for who I was, not who she assumed I was. I didn't answer her. I didn't offer comfort or forgiveness. The part of me that was her father had been carved out by this whole ugly affair. What was left was the man who had lived a life by a simple code. You respect the seal. You honor the signature. You don't take what isn't yours. They had violated every rule. I stood up slowly, my old bones creaking in protest, and walked past them into the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed its steady, reassuring song. The last of the evening light filtered through the window over the sink, painting the room in soft, gray tones. From the dining room, I could hear Megan start to plead again, her voice thin and reedy. I ignored it. I opened the bread box and took out a fresh lemon, one of the last from the tree Ruth had planted all those years ago. It felt cool and solid in my hand. Please, say something, Megan cried out from the other room. Her desperation was a raw, ugly sound in the quiet of my home. David was silent, the fight having drained out of him, leaving only the sour residue of fear. They were waiting for me to fix it, to make it go away, to be the father they needed me to be in that moment, to absorb the consequences of their actions, just as they had expected me to absorb the loss of my home. I picked up the small paring knife from the magnetic strip on the wall. Its edge was sharp. I turned my back to the doorway where they stood, a silhouette of failure against the fading light. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. Their chapter in this house was over. The story would continue, but they would not be in it. My focus was on the task at hand, on the simple, clean things that remained. I placed the lemon on the worn cutting board and began to peel away the bitter rind in one long, continuous spiral.